get started, today is a day of learning new things. There's something I want us to learn together. Most or many of us know this already, and Julie has taken us through. Whenever we say, God is good, we respond all the time. Now, we want to make a little tweak to this. So when I say, love God, we all respond with all your soul. So let us try this one. Love God with all your soul. With all your soul, love God. We give it a try again. Love God with all your soul. And with all your soul, love God. So you hear this repeated in the sermon. So when you hear me saying, love God, I expect that we can learn and respond together with all your soul. All right. So here we go now. Last week, Julie started giving us some insights on this year's Lenten theme. She spoke about loving God with all our hearts. Something very significant to know is that this year's theme is derived from the experiences that we struggle with in life every day. Our critical reflection on our experiences leads us to ask so many questions. We ask ourselves what matters the most. How can we become better selves? This task leads us to a task of finding balance. We struggle to find balance in this world where faith and politics, temporal and permanent, ideas and interests, or selflessness and wellness collide. As followers of Jesus, how does the teaching of Jesus, the greatest commandment, help us? To get a deeper sense of the meaning of this teaching, we are going to be exploring what it means to love God, love others, and love ourselves week after week throughout this Lenten season. Hopefully, this will enhance our understanding of devotion, volition, and service as followers of Jesus Christ. So, together with the audience that gathered around Jesus, we listen to this teaching to discern its practical and ethical meaning. Jesus, at this time, was addressing a critical thing that was hidden underneath the greatest commandment, and that is love for God, love for others, and love for the self. This created or creates a dynamic, vertical, and horizontal relationship between God and the people to people. Here, Jesus reinforces a perspective that was well known but neglected in the Jewish religious, cultural, or political context. This teaching holds together the religious and ethical implications of the law. Jesus gives a summary of the expansive view of the law of God to this expert of the law who wanted to know the greatest commandment in the law. For us to understand this better, there is need to look at the background to this interaction between Jesus and an expert of the law. In the preceding verses, Jesus engages with the Sadducees on marriage and resurrection. His response silences them. So this expert of the law had seen his rivals being silenced by Jesus. Now he thinks he can take his chances to prove his point and settle the scores with both Jesus and his rivals. And so, to settle the score, he asks, "Teacher, which one is the greatest commandment?" This was practically a trap for Jesus. It was a trap to test the credentials of Jesus, whether or not he was fit to be called a rabbi, faithful to the Jewish teaching. And in this case, if they found something missing, they would have a case to raise and report Jesus to the authorities for teaching a wrong doctrine or blasphemy. But Jesus demonstrates to this teacher of the law that he understands the law, as he gave a very precise summary from the Old Testament. And the books in question are Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 and 5, and Leviticus 19, verse 18. Jesus quotes the Jewish creed that instructed Israel to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And furthermore, Jesus goes on to elaborate to them that this does not end there. He wants them to understand the ethical implication of this law as presented in the Holiness Code. Here God said to Israel, love your neighbor as yourself. This critical discussion leads to a discovery that contests what the Jewish teachers of the law knew very well. The critical thing for the Jewish teachers and the scribes is that they knew the summary of the law, and this answer contested it properly. It was clear that the teachers of the law knew the details of the law and what that meant for them and the rest of the community. Because in the law of God, they knew what was defined for them as their roles and duties towards both God and the other. And so without doubt, the law of God was primary in the setting of the Jewish people. But here is something that Jesus brings out, which elevates the discussion for all the people around and the rest of the followers of Jesus. It is not about the mastery of the law of God, knowing it, reciting it, or speaking it, but being in a dynamic relationship with God and others, defined by love. It is the relationship and doing part that Jesus elevates. And so here we hear Jesus saying, and I would want us to respond, love God with all your soul. With all your soul, love God. So today's task is to deeply reflect on what it means to love God with all your soul, according to the Jewish tradition, and see how that impacts the way we respond to this command. In the Hebrew scriptures, particularly the book that Jesus cites, the word used to describe God's love is ahava. Ahava demonstrated not only a human experience of love, but critically revealed the covenant loyalty and devotion to God. This is because this love is not a human construct or sentiment, but a reality rooted in God's own character and purposes. Ahava love is used in the Hebrew context to recognize God's own faithfulness, love, and covenant with the people. This concept or this idea is reinforced when Jesus uses agape to explain the love God requires out of us. Agape is one of the Greek words for love. And so additionally, in this context, we get back to realize that even the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures translated agape, ahava love, as agape to denote the divine love and communicate its implications to the faith community. Agape is divine, willful, sacrificial, or unconditional love. Whether agape or ahava love, it grounded the community to know that both the vertical and horizontal, dynamic or interpersonal human-to-human relationships matter in this life. Thus, it is not only about covenant loyalty and action, but it also conveys a principle of giving oneself completely to God in devotion. So when we engage with the Greek language deeper, we discover what Matthew communicates to the people about the teaching of Jesus. The verb that Jesus uses when answering this expert of the law changes the way this teaching is applied in our lives. Jesus does not use a past tense or a present tense, but uses a future imperative. This future imperative provides a way that shows that Jesus is not putting a closure to this task. Jesus instead shows that loving God with all your soul is not a one-time thing, but an ongoing or continuous devotion. What is the soul? That's a very difficult question for our context today because we have multiple understandings. But during Jesus' time, the soul represented the whole human being, our being, the body and everything that makes us humans. It held the idea of standing with God, even to the end of one's life. So when somebody says, love God, it held this idea that you have to walk with God, even to the end of one's life. This is to live in living surrender to God after having been seized by God's love. This approach defies the distinctions and binaries that we create between the body and the soul, or the unseen part of ourselves and that which is visible. These distinctions have led people to neglect the body at the expense of attending to the soul. But what we get here is that the whole self, the whole person, regardless of circumstances, is involved in this devotion to God. So whatever we do with our lives, it is part of our spirituality and must translate into a vertical relationship with God, impacting the horizontal relationship. So, friends, whenever we hear God saying, love God with all your soul, with all your soul, love God, we realize that not a single part of us is left from this call. Everything that makes us humans is involved in this call. It challenges the thinking of the soul to be just a core of an individual, making decisions that affect the body, but it embraces the whole of who we are, the whole human being, to be in a living and loving relationship with God. It is about loving God yesterday, today, tomorrow, or forever. It is about submitting ourselves in this relationship or devotion to shape and enhance our discipleship. It is about fully submitting ourselves to following the ways of Jesus in a world where conflict, anger, hatred, violence, or intimidation are on the rise. It is to move away from mere speech to following God with actions that show the love for God. Therefore, when we love God with all our souls, we move from isolation to communion with God and become active participants in God's ministry. So, how can we respond to the teaching of Jesus when he says, love God with all your soul, and with all your soul, love God? Our response lies and relies on having been taken, seized by God's love, God's agape, or God's ahava love. In order to love, ahava, agape, God back. It is to be seized by God's care in order to love God back. It is to be seized by God's covenant loyalty in order to love God back. It is to see God dwelling in our midst, working in us in order to love God back. Until when the world sees the face of God in the troubled, those seeking, the vulnerable, in our different experiences, it will not be able to love God. This revelation enables us to see God siding with us, siding with the suffering people, siding with the vulnerable, siding with the seniors, siding with the sick, siding with the children or the oppressed. This love enables us to see the deeds of God in our lives. We become aware that God stands with us and we are not alone as we lovingly participate in God's mission. So, when we are seized by God's agape love, we move from one-time responses to daily living. We move from one being inactive to being active. We move from indifference to devotion. We move from disservice to service. We begin to walk with God and we stay open to God's direction. This is what the world is lacking. This Lenten season, let us hear together what God is calling us to be now and forever, so that we find balance in this life. Let our choices, wills, decisions, or actions be guided by this love for God, this love which is unconditional, covenantal, relational, and which directs our everyday actions and devotion. It is about loving God with all your soul, with the whole being, every day, and not just one-time thing, but it becomes our lifestyle. So, whenever we hear Jesus saying, love God with all your soul, love God, we respond with honest what constitutes who we are. May God bless us all. Amen.